Today we will be looking at bankruptcy filing trends by chapter in the state of Colorado. To do this, we have about a dozen charts showing bankruptcy activity in the state going back to 1990. All of this filing data comes from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. This first chart shows total filings by year in the state since 1990. During that time, there have been about 533,000 cases filed in the state. If you look back in the 1990s, filings were actually fairly flat, around 16,000 per year, a little bit up and down. And this is a very unusual pattern in that almost every other state had a very large increases during the 1990s. In Colorado, from 2001 to 2004, there were substantial increases, and filings got up to about 27,000. There's a big jump in 2005, the year of bankruptcy reform, and that was the peak year where filings got over 40,000. Dropped by more than 75% the next year, and then jumped up as the recession came on, and so by 2010 filings were the second highest ever, and well above where they had been in the years prior to bankruptcy reform. Since then, filings are down about 55%. And so in 2015, total filings were about were less than where they were in 1990, and only about one half of where they were in 2004. This next map shows filings relative to population by state during the period 1990 to 2015. On this chart, the reds are the states that have the very highest bankruptcy rates, and Tennessee is the perennial leader in that. The yellows are the states that have very low bankruptcy rates, and actually Alaska is usually has the lowest bankruptcy rate in the country. Over this whole period of time, Colorado has been very close to the national average, about 11% above. Now, looking at this year by year, the red is the national average, and the blue is Colorado. You can see that from 1990 to 1995, Colorado was a little above average. From 96 to 03, they tended to be a little bit below. There's a very big spike in 2005 in the state, and then dropped back down to average in 2006. During the recession, the bankruptcy rate in Colorado got well above the national average. By 2010, it was about 30% above, and has now dropped down to right about where the national average is. So even though over time they've been 11% above average, it's been a mix of years above and below average. This chart shows total Chapter 7 filings by year in the state. And it follows the same pattern as total filings, where in the 1990s, Chapter 7s were running around 12,000 per year. Big increase to well over 20,000 by 2004. A real spike in 2005, 80% decline in 2006, and back up through the recession, and down more than 50% since then. And So right now, Chapter 7 filings are about the same as they were in 1990 in the state, and about one half of where they were in the years just immediately prior to bankruptcy reform, say 2003 and 2004. Looking at Chapter 11 cases by year, there's a big drop-off in the 1990s, and this happened pretty much everywhere, and some of this may be due to raising the Chapter 13 debt limits. Since then, filings have been about 75 per year most years, but a little bit higher during and after the recessions, particularly the most recent recession. Filings were fairly high then, but overall, generally around 75 per year, and it looks like Colorado's on pace for 75, 80 cases again in 2016. Chapter 13 filings in the state have had kind of an interesting pattern in that they're running around 4,000 in the early 1990s, dropped off by the late 1990s through around 2005 to 2,500 to 3,000 per year. The big drop off in 2006. Most states had a decline that year, although not as much. And then a big increase through the recession, and by far the peak years. And since then have dropped nearly in half. And it looks like 2016 will be about the same, around 2,700. But overall, in 2015, the Chapter 13 filings in the state were about a third below where they were in the early 1990s, where typically most states are about a third above where they were then. So over time, Chapter 13 activities kind of decreased in the state compared to other places. And this shows on the next chart if the percent of cases filed as Chapter 13s. And the national average has been hugging around 30% for several decades, with some disruption before and after bankruptcy reform. In Colorado in the early 1990s, they're very close to the national average, but then dropped off down to around 10% of cases by 2004. And then after bankruptcy reform, Colorado has been more in the 10 to 20% range each year compared to the national, which has gone above 30% now. This next chart shows the unemployment rate by quarter in the state since 2006. It's kind of a proxy of how the economy has gone. And basically, throughout the whole period, the blue line here is Colorado, and they have followed the national pattern pretty closely, but been generally 1%, 2% below the national average. And right now, the rate in the state is under 4%, which is quite good and one of the lowest historically it's been. Although it has jumped up a little bit in the early part of 2016. Bankruptcies most recently peaked nationwide in the year ended September 2010, and since then the annual totals have gone down consistently, and the total decline from the peak is 49%. In Colorado, the decline has been even more at 58%, and this map shows that the yellow states are states that have had relatively low declines of under 40%, and most of these are in the southeast and states that have very high Chapter 13 caseloads. The largest declines have been in most of New England and also the Southwest, and particularly Nevada and California are down by 70% since their peak 6 years ago. But Colorado has also had a larger than average decline. Looking at what the decline is by quarter, the red is the national average, and you see that from 2011 through 2015 is running between 10 and 15% pretty much every quarter. And since then, the rate of decline has slowed down quite a bit, so it's more in the 5 or 6% range. With Colorado, the declines were fairly average through 2012 anyways, and then since then you can see that the blue line goes down well below the red, indicating that the declines in Colorado in filings are larger than average and in the 15 to 20% range most quarters. Looking at what's happened in 2016, in the first 6 months the national average decline was nearly 6%, which is much less than what it's been. And a number of states, the ones colored red, are actually showing increases now. And if we looked at this a year or two ago, there wouldn't have been any red on the map. But now there's more and more, and we're expecting every quarter to see a few more states pop into the red range. The white states colored white are still showing fairly large declines, and if we had looked at this 2 years ago, just about every state would be colored white on here. Now the West Coast, part of the Northeast, and a few scattered states, including Colorado, are still showing more than 10% declines. This looked like this continued or even accelerated in the third quarter, where Colorado's filings were down about 16% over the same quarter in 2015. I think the overall outlook is that there'll be about 13,000 cases filed in the state in 2016 and about the same in 2017, followed by small increases in later years. But I don't see any return to the 20 to 30,000 cases that were filed in the years prior to bankruptcy reform, unless there's some major bankruptcy legislation or another severe recession hits. That concludes our look at bankruptcy filings in Colorado. For more statistical information and other information on bankruptcy, be sure to visit the newsroom section of the ABI website at www.abi.org.